I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, welcome to VLGA Connect. It's time for TGU. We're recording this slightly earlier this week because of this quirky thing in the state of Victoria where there's a grand final, public holiday on the day before the grand final. Tony Raunic from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers. Hello to you. This is one of, I think, the legacies of a man we're about to talk about, the outgoing or the now gone Premier of Victoria, Dan Andrews.
Exactly. The AFL Grand Final public holiday brought in by Dan. Perhaps one of those things people will remember fondly as opposed to the things that they don't. But yeah, made an enormous impact on, government across Australia. But in terms of the local government sector as well, Chris, a really significant impact over, what was it, eight or more years?
9 years, I think.
9 years,
just about, yeah. So 2012 election, 2014 election, then re-elected in 2018 and 2022. Of course. Now, look, a lot's being said elsewhere. It's not for us to necessarily unpack all of that other than perhaps reflect a bit on the impact of those years on local government, because, of course, it was the start of Dan Andrews' reign where the rate capping regime was brought in. That's one thing that council people will remember him for.
Yeah, very significant impact on councils and perhaps enduring, and but many other things, as you'd expect from, I think the fourth longest serving Premier we've had in Victoria. Lots of things that have impacted on the sector. I think, as you say, there'll be contrasting views out there depending on which part of the sector you speak to. I suspect that there'll be a difference between metropolitan Melbourne and regions in terms of looking back at his legacy. I think the big build in Metro Melbourne was significant. Things like, Metro Tunnel, suburban rail loop, the Western highway connection, or Westgate Tunnel, wasn't it? That was what it was called. Level crossing removal.
All of which are yet to have their true impact on the city. Yeah.
Absolutely. But, level crossing removal across the suburbs, some in the regions, admittedly, but they were largely metropolitan-centric projects, and I think would largely be seen in a positive light by the community as sort of enduring legacies. We can't forget the COVID lockdowns, and there are strong still views out there in the community, both for and against what occurred there. Probably less enduring, but I think still significant impacts, or perhaps less remembered impacts, would be privatisation of the Port of Melbourne, significant one for us. Vic Roads, large parts of Vic Roads got privatised, and the free kindergartens, three-year-old kinders was a significant one. But I think in the regions, things like, cancelling the Commonwealth Games in 2026 would be a significant blow. And I think perhaps that those big build projects didn't quite resonate as much or impact as much on the regions. So his legacy might be, perhaps, I suspect, and that's just a personal view, I suspect not as positive in some parts of the regions. But nonetheless, really enduring. And more recently, of course, the housing statement, although it will be for others now, for the new Premier, Jacinda Allen, and others in government with her and beyond her, to really add the meat, the detail to how those, that strategy will be, or that statement will be implemented, and what will occur in relation to the other recommendations of Operation Sandon. And I suppose the other thing, I'd want to say, given we're a governance show, is that I guess Dan Andrews will also be remembered for some of those, consistent sort of soft corruption allegations that we saw, across the life of his time as Premier. There were a number of occasions where, there were inquiries into issues that happen with government in the state, and on a number of occasions he was sort of called to give evidence as well.
I think that's a really good summary, Tony. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Some would say that under Dan Andrews, the Victorian government has had a bit of a dismissive approach towards local government, not necessarily at the local government minister level, but in some of the things that they've done and the statements they've made, and perhaps decisions that have been made without what the sector would call full and proper consultation. Do you think that's fair, and should we perhaps expect maybe a different attitude towards local government going forward?
Yeah, look. I think it's a fair comment about a perceived attitude of the Premier. I don't think Dan Andrews will be perceived as having been a strong supporter of local government.
No.
That being said, of course, the 2020 Act came into being and was worked up during his term as Premier. It led to a less prescriptive approach, I suppose, and perhaps a bit more flexibility at a council level. Whether that endures or not remains to be seen, with some of the sort of windbacks of some of that flexibility that seemingly are about to occur given recent announcements. But I think you're right, with the rate capping, with some of the persistent statements and criticisms of local government, I don't think he'll be perceived as someone who was a strong champion of that level of government in the state.
So what might change, do you think? I know none of us have a crystal ball, but already regional cities Victoria have come out and strongly welcomed the appointment of Jacinta Allen as the new Premier, being a Bendigo MP and in the regions, and perhaps that regional focus might somehow take a different tone.
Yep, that's true. Although Daniel Andrews himself had grew up I think in Wangaratta, or spent much of his childhood there. But yes, that representing a Premier representing a regional seat is significant. I also think perhaps we might see a bit more independence of action by ministers for local government, other relevant ministers. I mean, there did seem to be a strong centralisation of power within the Premier's office throughout Dan Andrews' ascendancy, and we may well see that swing back towards a bit more independence at a ministerial level.
Yeah, that's been speculated a bit, hasn't it? Just in terms of balancing here, your comments about perhaps not as much impact on the regions as on the city with the big build. I do want to note the regional cities, Victoria, in their statement welcoming the new Premier, did pay tribute to Dan Andrews and mentioned policies such as regional hospital investment, regional rail revival, payroll tax in regional Victoria being the lowest in the country, impact on jobs creation, etc. So they've certainly put a few ticks in the column for regional Victoria in Dan Andrews' legacy. Report.
No, I don't doubt that there are those achievements, and it's more a personal sense of a perception that occurs. I'm often out in the regions, was again this week, and have strong ties to that area. And I think perhaps some previous Labor administrations were seen as more, seen more favourably. Steve Bracks was seen very favourably by the regional cities. John Brumby, similarly. I'm stumbling on my words this morning, but I think perhaps Dan Andrews much lesser so.
Yeah. All right. We might leave that there, other than to say you mentioned the housing statement being one of the big and final things delivered under Dan Andrews' watch. There's been a little bit more reaction since we unpacked that last week. Some councils have moved to remind the community not so fast on the second dwelling stuff because the changes haven't come in yet. I see Yarra Ranges was one to do that.
Yeah, timely reminder, I think, from Yarra Ranges that, hey, you still need a permit for a second dwelling for those so-called tiny homes, and dependent persons units. We need to await, the planning control changes taking effect before the requirement for a planning permit is removed. Also, I think a strong statement from Stonington City Council in a media release, calling on the state government to work with councils on implementation of its housing statement. The acting mayor, Melina Sear, pointed out that local governments have a key role in the planning process. Hope that the state government will work with councils in that streamlining of the planning system to make it more efficient, and says that there always needs to be a balance between achieving affordable housing and also preserving, the character of an area. And that's all been a strong theme, I think, in Stonington Council for many years.
And on that, I think another example of the tension and the problem that's been grappled with here is Kingston's response to the planning minister's decision in relation to the Kingston Golf Course. They're going to use public land or green space for housing development, if I'm understanding this correctly.
That's right. Kingston have come out this week. The mayor, Hardy Saab, quoted in some statements, but council very disappointed that what they describe as valuable open space at the Kingswood Golf Course is being rezoned for housing in a decision by the Minister for Planning. Over 8,000 objections to that proposal by Australian Super. But interesting, Australian Super have indicated that they plan to sell the land now, take the profit, if you like. So the mayor's pointed out that this is an opportunity for the new owner perhaps to reset the relationship with the community, perhaps, in his words, offer some genuine engagement on the site's future. And Kingston Council are also taking this issue of golf course development further. They're actually they've foreshadowed that they're bringing a motion to the October MAV State Council, calling on the Minister for Planning to review a set of guidelines, which is called Planning Guidelines for Conversion of golf course land to other purposes. And councils say that those guidelines give insufficient weight to the role that golf course land can contribute to open space networks, to achieving renewable energy targets, and also to counteract that urban heat island effect that we have in the metropolitan areas. So interesting motion being brought to MAV State Council by Kingston City Council, and I'm sure there'll be lots of councils where there's golf courses that are potentially up for redevelopment will be really interested in what those guidelines say and how a review ought to be undertaken and what a review ought to consider.
Do you think we'll see, again, I know you don't have the crystal ball as I don't, much change in portfolios with a new premier coming in? Should we be thinking perhaps the local government minister might change, the planning minister might change? There's
often a bit of a reshuffle after a change of leader, and we've got a change of leader and a change of deputy leader here. So often those successful persons want to reward people who've supported them and want to put their own sort of stamp on the cabinet portfolio arrangements. So I think that's a reasonable thing to expect over forthcoming weeks. I don't have any intel on, for example, the local government minister, the Minister for Planning, those particular ministries that heavily impact on our sector. But I think we can expect some level of cabinet reshuffle.
Yeah. All right. We'll keep an eye on that. And perhaps one last word on the housing stuff. We spoke last week about some of the regional mayors that were starting to respond, particularly to the short stay levy that's coming in 2025. I noticed some quotes from the Alpine Shire mayor. We don't hear from that corner of the state that much. This was in the Border Mail, where the mayor there made some comments saying he didn't think that levy was going to have much impact on housing provision, and that's been echoed in a few places around the country in fact, that, while it might raise revenue that can go into housing development, it's probably not going to deter owners from moving their short stay rental properties into a longer term rental arrangement. Time will tell, I guess.
Yeah, and certainly, I spent some time at Moyne Shire this week, and with the councillors, and we did talk about this short stay levy. And Moyne, of course, has within its boundary Port Fairy, which is a destination for staying for accommodation purposes for people. And councillors were generally concerned that there wasn't an allocation of levy funds collected from a particular municipality back to affordable housing in that municipality. They felt that there ought to be sort of an earmarking where funds were collected locally. They ought to be distributed and spent locally as well. Yeah. And I think that's a consistent theme across the regional councils and those municipalities that are heavily affected by short stay accommodation providers.
Yes, you wonder how they arrived at that 25% figure, don't you? Because that's not gone down that well out in the regions, and understandably so. Let's move on. There's lots of coverage of that in other places. We've got a conduct panel decision that's worth unpacking a bit. Tony, a 3-month suspension coming into effect for a councillor at the City of Frankston.
Well, yes, we've just recently had a decision from a councillor conduct panel dated the 31st of August, published on the Local Government Victoria website. It relates to Frankston City Council and an application by the majority of Frankston City councillors against Councillor Stephen Hughes, and ultimately a finding against Councillor Hughes that he was guilty of serious misconduct, that he'd be reprimanded, but significantly, I think, a fairly onerous sanction, a 3-month suspension from council. Now, there's a maximum suspension that a councillor conduct panel can currently order, which is a 12-month suspension. Well, in this case, 3 months is a pretty onerous type suspension, and we haven't seen these sort of length of suspensions typically.
And Tony, I notice in the decision there's some discussion about the impact of the various lengths of suspension. So, for example, more than 2 months, you've got to return your council provided devices, etc. You don't get an allowance, I think, kicks in after that 2-month period. So they've certainly weighed up the impact of a longer than 2-month suspension, haven't they?
Absolutely. And and what's important both in this decision and just understand the context of the decision would be that there are previous misconduct findings against Councillor Stephen Hughes. Right. And that history was relevant in this case because there had been in July 2021 4 findings of misconduct against Councillor Hughes and a 1-month suspension, and he was directed to make an apology. That was in relation to some social media posts that he'd made that compared council's operations to the North Korean government.
Oh, yes, we remember this.
Yes. There's some language around, comparing council's operations to, Kim Jong-un. Yeah. That determination of it was actually an arbiter decision in July 21 was followed by an application by Councillor Hughes against one of his councillor colleagues, Councillor Bolam, the councillor who happened to have been the representative of the other councils on that earlier arbiter decision. So Councillor Bolam had led the advocacy on that arbiter decision where there'd been a finding of misconduct. Subsequently, Councillor Hughes brought an application against Councillor Bolam alleging serious misconduct, and that was dismissed. And this current matter involved a finding of misconduct against Councillor Hughes in relation to public Facebook posts about that prior panel decision not to make a finding of misconduct against Councillor Bolam. And in this case, the councillor conduct panel found that posts from Councillor Hughes that continued to allege that Councillor Bolam had engaged in the misconduct that had been complained of at the prior panel decision, but for which the prior panel found, did not amount to misconduct. Those continued sustained sort of public allegations, given the findings, were amounted to misconduct. But also importantly, and I think this will be one that many councillors will be really interested in, this element of the decision, that the councillor conduct panel considered Facebook statements made about reimbursement claims by certain other councillors at Frankston City Council. And essentially the Facebook posts alleged that those reimbursement claims were essentially claims that the councillors weren't entitled to make, alleged
personal expenses.
Yeah, imputed that those claims, which were for things like childcare expenses, professional development, like attending the Australian Institute of Company Directors course, etc., were inappropriate, and also alleged that those other councillors were using their office for, pecuniary profit and political gain. And each of those councillors, in relation to which those allegations about reimbursement claims, inappropriate reimbursement claim allegations, each of those councillors gave oral evidence to the councillor conduct panel to explain why their reimbursement claims were necessary and reasonable. And I think that, there was some really strong language from the councillor conduct panel in finding that it was misconduct to describe these reimbursement claims as inappropriate. And if I could just read out some of the language in paragraph 86 of the decision. Further, and I'm quoting now, further, there is a strong public interest in ensuring councillors are well trained, for example, undertaking the company directors course. One of the key vices of the Facebook post is that it falsely implied these expenses were improper, and that those councillors who applied for reimbursement were motivated by greed or for political gain. This does much to undermine public confidence, made all worse for the fact that Councillor Hughes paid for the post to be distributed widely within Frankston. So, really, if you like, a decision that acknowledges the value and the importance of, councillors being reimbursed for appropriate expenses. There was a councillor who's a single mother at Frankston who claimed childcare expenses. Other councillors sought to, undertake professional development to improve their ability to better represent the ratepayers and residents of Frankston, to sit on various boards, etc., in their role as councillors. And the councillor conduct panel found that it was amounted to misconduct to be describing councillors, seeking to claim reimbursement as somehow, seeking personal pecuniary gain or being motivated inappropriately. Councillor Hughes indicated that he wasn't going to apologise, didn't want an order that he apologise, because he said, well, my apology wouldn't be sincere because I don't believe I've committed, I'm guilty of misconduct. And ultimately the councillor conduct panel found that not only was he guilty of misconduct, but there would be there was reprimanded and he would be suspended for a period of 3 months. So interesting chain of decisions there. I should say that I've had some involvement in this process and given some advice to particularly Councillor Chris Bolam during his sort of involvement in these cases. But I think it's quite a leading decision now in relation to this both reimbursement of claims allegations, and secondly, just generally in relation to social media again, and the risks of social media, and particularly the risks of making statements on social media about a prior councillor conduct process.
Yeah. A few things that jumped out at me, Tony, and you've covered most of them. There were more than that allegation that was found. There were some that were not found to have been proven. So read through to understand the context of that. I thought this point that the panel made a couple of times about the post having been paid to be boosted on Facebook was an interesting one. I hadn't read that before, but that obviously goes to the intent of that statement being seen by as many people as possible, doesn't it?
Yeah, quite correct.
Yeah. And the fact that the panel said, well, we're not going to order an apology because it would be insincere, I wondered, has that happened before? Because we've discussed this before, where councillors have been ordered to apologise, and the apology in the minds of many has been found to be lacking, or shall I say, insincere.
Yeah, and I think the critical aspect here is that Councillor Hughes, in his own submissions, said don't order me to make an apology because it would be insincere if I did. So credit to him, he's made the point that if I had to apologise, it wouldn't be sincere. And so, but I think what has actually been I think quite meaningful here for the council conduct panel is the fact that there's a history of prior suspensions, prior findings of misconduct that also relate to social media posts. So I think, but there is a sense for me also that councillor conduct panels, potentially arbiters as well, are more prepared to go down the more severe grade of penalties in relation to misconduct and serious misconduct allegations these days. And maybe it's just, a sense that with the proliferation sometimes of poor behaviours in the sector, there's a need to go to the stronger sanctions perhaps to stamp some of this out.
All right. So as you say, that came out at the end of August, has been published recently on the Local Government Victoria website, and it's there for all to read and is quite instructive. Thank you for taking us through that, Tony. Let's have a look at some other stories just quickly that are doing the rounds this week in local government circles. I see Latrobe City Council has announced that their period of holding their council meetings online is about to end, returning to in-person meetings with a few new controls in place.
Yeah, and quite interesting, those controls, where I think used to the notion of attendees at council meetings now perhaps having to register their details on attending. But in this case, at Latrobe, attendees will be required to pre-register by booking online by midday on the day of the meeting. And I think part of that is probably due to the fact that there's a 60-person limit to the gallery where these meetings are being held. And so council can certainly close bookings once they reach the limit. Also, when you members of the public attend at the gallery, they'll need to produce some photo ID. It might be just a photo of their license or something on their phone, but they'll need to at least prove their identity before they enter. So, different regime we're now seeing across the state. I think more formalities in attending a meeting. Of course, anyone can virtually attend still, and they don't need, I don't believe anyone needs to provide any sort of credentials to do that. They just need to log in. But attending in person, you'll need to pre-register and bring your photo ID.
And I'm assuming that they've got advice to suggest that they're within their rights to do that, because I wonder, Tony, what the the old Act thing about open council meetings. We've seen the online bit tested and found to be fine. I'm assuming we're going to see these additional controls tested in some way at some point too.
Yeah. Look, I think certainly council's got the ability to control who enters council-owned land. But the photo ID thing, if you're underage, will you have photo ID? Presumably you've got a student card or something like that. I'm not sure. Perhaps there's something in the detail about underage people and whether they're just, maybe they don't have to provide ID. Maybe the adult that accompanies them does. But there will be, I think, some nuances as we start to see these regimes enforced.
Yeah. All right. One to keep an eye on. Interesting story out of Swan Hill, where a mistake that perpetuated for 12 years has been now fixed. Now, this was the painting of a I think it was a bollard to represent the first female riverboat skipper on the Murray River. Someone put a beard on it when it was updated back in 2011, and it's only been noticed now.
Yes, Captain Pearl Wallace, who was a long-term riverboat captain on the Murray River, skipper from 1947, and only hung up her sort of captain's hat in 1977. So long period. There was some flooding, as you say, on the Murray, and this particular, bollard statue at Naya, little town north of Swan Hill, was damaged in 2011 with the flooding. And when it was restored, someone not knowing really the history has painted this scruffy seaman type beard on the bollard. And according to Council's acting director of Community and Cultural Services, Camille Cullinan, she said, look, this gender mix-up was only recently brought to Council's attention by Captain Wallace's grandson. So in a nice kind of twist, the family's been able to bring that to Council's attention, and they've restored the bollard to rightfully, represent Captain Pearl Wallace.
Interesting story. The ABC's reported that one. Do you buy that it was an honest mistake and not some prank that someone's got away with for 12 years, Tony?
I'm curious to know whether the name Pearl Wallace appeared, close to the bollard, because that certainly suggests to me a female captain. But I did see the picture, and I think it was just that kind of like, what would a sailor look like, and it's this kind of this 19th century kind of view of what a sailor might look like. Look something out of, as I say, someone sailing for the British colonies or something to me.
Yeah. All right. So just when you think you've heard it all in local government, you hear something new like that. Up at Mildura, we're going to stay on the river. This is a serious issue. The impact of all these natural disasters, in this case, the floods last year on the Murray, starting to have an impact on the level to which insurance companies are going to allow sites to be covered. And this has led to Mildura having to find a new site for a community project because they can't get the level of insurance coverage that they would want for it.
Yes, it's the Riverfront Adventure Park that Mildura City Council have had to, relocate as a result of, as you say, this lack of insurance coverage. When Council first announced the original plans for the park, there was more than adequate insurance coverage at a site closer to the river. But Council's acting General Manager of Healthy Communities, Thomas Stevenson, is quoted this week as saying that flood insurance coverage for these impacted regional Victorian councils has been slashed from 20 million down to 2 million.
Yeah.
That's a substantial reduction, to 10% of the previous figure. And the result, of course, is that, councils need to reconsider, are they locating facilities in the right location where there is adequate insurance cover? So what's going to occur? The people of Mildura, the visitors to Mildura, won't lose their new adventure park. It's going to be located at JC Park, where, given its proximity to the river, there's a greater level of insurance coverage, I gather. But it's just a real practical and enduring impact of those
Yeah.
floods that perhaps we hadn't considered. We would have considered, the cost of rebuilds and that, but, we probably haven't considered as much the impact on the location of new infrastructure.
Exactly. And the financial risk that councils would need to take on as a result of that. Now, as we record this, the council hasn't made that decision. I think they're making it on Thursday night at their meeting. So keep an eye on the news feeds if you want to know an update from that. That came from a press release on the Mildura website, so pretty sure they'll provide an update in due course. Let's whip through a few other things as time's getting away. Tony, we mentioned a resignation at Maroondah a couple of weeks ago. One of the few that's going to require a by-election rather than a countback under the current electoral structure there at Maroondah. This was when Marika Graham resigned. So that by-election's been set for the 2nd of December.
Yeah, I think that largely centred around Croydon North, the Barngyong ward. And so they'll be going to the polls, getting their voting ballots in about mid-November.
All right. So we'll obviously bring you more on that as that by-election happens. A couple of interstate stories of interest. One that we've been following is the Ku-ring-gai general manager story, Tony, where the council pulled a surprise vote to terminate the employment of John McKee, the general manager. A rescission motion was lodged the next day. I can't remember whether we updated on TGU on this. An extraordinary meeting was called to consider that rescission motion. A quorum couldn't be maintained because some of the councillors left the room. It came back this week and the original decision was upheld. And further, the council has introduced a late item to appoint a recruitment consultant and an acting GM. So it's all over for John McKee at Ku-ring-gai. Very publicly played out CEO council issue there.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that impacts upon the recruitment process.
Yeah.
But yes, as you say, they've appointed a recruiting firm, and that process is now commencing at Ku-ring-gai on the outskirts of Sydney, I think. Yeah.
And I noticed, not for the first time I've seen a group of councillors assume that this is doable in less than 3 months. In their motion, they said they intend or hope to appoint the new GM, I think, on the 12th of December. That is less than 3 months from now. And I've never seen it happen in that time period. Have you?
It will require someone to be having their CV all ready and be ready to just send that in, and they've been the ideal candidate, presumably.
Yeah.
But it's an optimistic time frame, but we'll watch it.
That's a lovely, tactful way of putting it, Tony. Down in Hobart this week, the council has referred one of its own councillors to that state's Integrity Commission. This is, again, believe it or not, over some social media activity where the councillor criticised a gender workshop that she was being asked to attend. She called it, what did she call it? Re-education being imposed on her. The Deputy Mayor flagged a motion to refer that for further investigation, to which the councillor responded with an email to all councillors threatening legal action, and that email's been bundled up with the material that's been sent off to the Integrity Commission. Yeah,
will all be subject to some interesting scrutiny there at the Integrity Commission, and we'll let viewers know what decisions are made when they're released.
Yeah, that's Hobart. A couple of councillor conduct issues out of Queensland and WA as well. The Mayor of the Gold Coast, Tom Tate, has been found to have committed misconduct and been ordered a couple of things he's been ordered to do, but at this point he is appealing that decision. This relates to expenses for a football club membership, Tony, the Gold Coast Titans, which I thought put an interesting twist on things.
Yeah, amongst other things, Chris, but yeah, it does. And I thought, I have some sympathy for Councillor Tate in relation to the memberships. I actually think, so it was the Gold Coast Titans NRL Rugby Union Club, and those annual memberships over 2 years was worth in total less than $300. I sort of wonder whether, if you're mayor of Gold Coast, I'm sure they're very parochial supporters of their, National Rugby League team. there might be some expectation that the mayor's, regularly seen at those games and seen to be a supporter of the, the town's, the parochial support for the club in the town. But there were other, firstly, I've got to say that the conduct tribunal doesn't agree with me on that. They said it was difficult to understand how the councillor considered that membership of the NRL club was incurred in his role as mayor. But I think there were also some claims that the Mayor Tom Tate sought reimbursement of some donations to community charities and some purchase of some audiovisual type equipment, headphones, this sort of thing. So, and they were also found to be inappropriate claims.
Yeah. The tribunal did say that they didn't believe he'd acted dishonestly or fraudulently, but had not complied with the expense policy. And one of the findings was that he undertake training in that council expense and a reimbursement policy. But as I said, he's planning to appeal those outcomes. So there might be a sequel to this just yet. And Tony, in WA, similarly there, the mayor of the town of Cambridge. Now, keep in mind, we're right in the middle of election season in Western Australia. Elections are next month. Kerry Shannon is her name. She's been found to have breached the code of conduct for elected members on 9 occasions. 7 of the complaints involve her main rival for the mayoral election, a man named Gary Mack. She's saying this is all politically motivated, including the timing of the release of the findings on these. And again, she's appealing and even talking about potential Supreme Court action in this case.
Yeah, I did see that. I think this relates to letters from Councillor Shannon to a local newspaper that were published in that paper, and also some comments she made at a council meeting about a decision to approve a 3-story home development. But things are getting hot in WA. I think there was another story that came out too about, defacing of corflute signs, was it?
There's been a couple now, actually, Tony. Signs going missing, signs being defaced, candidates being subjected to, in some cases, racial, slurs on their signs. An interesting side note to one of this is the mayor of the city of Canning. A couple of his signs were removed, and he had a tracking device to be able to track where those signs went. And the police have now charged 2 people with theft over those signs. And get this, one of those 2 people is a sitting councillor on the same council with that mayor.
Look, I'm trying to remember my experiences around these things, whether it was in relation to state or federal elections or local, but certainly there's been media in Victoria in the past where, council identities have been involved in stealing, removing these signs of political rivals, in defacing them. What I thought was an interesting twist was that I thought it was great publicity for one of the candidates. His name's Manny Singh.
Yes.
He's a candidate for the city of Swan. And he's been photographed and appears in WA Today, a major newspaper over there, surrounded by his corflute signs that have been defaced, and saying, it's not going to stop me. I'm still going to fight to represent the community. And I thought it was great publicity for him in the end.
Well, as I say, it's an ill wind that blows no good, Tony, but I'm sure we probably prefer not to have that aggression and that abuse happening as well. But par for the course, we'd like to think not, but there does seem to be more of this aggro creeping into election campaigns, and sadly there's a couple of weeks yet to go in WA. Let's finish with 2 very different but interesting stories. I just wanted to provide an update on the virtual fence trial out of Eurobodalla Shire in New South Wales, because I think this is something I would hope to see a lot of councils picking up around the country, and I know Townsville has. They've used this virtual fence to try and reduce the number of roadkill on a particular stretch of road, and the results have been nothing short of outstanding. So since October last year, I think they've had 5 cases, where normally they would have many, many, many times that amount. So it seems to be working. This is using technology, including AI, and basically educating these animals to stop as vehicles are approaching and not cross the road at a dangerous time.
I wondered how this worked, but it's a fabulous idea when I read about it. It's so there's a series of these green posts every 25 meters over a 1 kilometer distance. And when a car headlight driving down the road, or a car driving down the road with its headlights on, approaches that post, the post gives off an audible sign and also a blue light flash. And the audible sound, is high pitched and designed for wildlife to hear. And essentially, it's a warning for wildlife that there's something dangerous approaching. And as you say, the number of road kills has markedly reduced. And I can see, as you say, in a local context, councils in both, the outer metropolitan areas of Melbourne, but across rural and regional Victoria, looking at installing this type of technology to reduce, wildlife deaths on the roads, and also from a safety perspective, improve safety for users of roads, so then perhaps less likely to be impacting in an accident upon a kangaroo or a wombat or something significant like that.
Yeah. So well done to Badalla Shire Council. The trial's been so successful, they're rolling it out to other parts of their shire. As I said, Townsville's doing it. I did an interview with some people at Townsville for the local government news roundup a couple of months ago. If you're interested in that, that will be in your podcast queue. And let's hope to hear of more councils picking up on this exciting use of technology. Not quite so exciting as the use of technology that's coming into a Brisbane dog park, Tony, where there's been a poisoning incident. The council's installed cameras to try and see what's going on there.
Yeah, I know. You're a dog lover, Chris. You got dogs?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
can't you hear them in the background every 5 minutes or so, telling me what's taking you so long?
Yeah. We've got our 3 border collies, Remy, Ruby, and Darcy. But I thought this was really interesting. So, as you say, CCTV cameras installed in the dog park, but an unusual problem in relation to poisoning at the Northcote Reserve Dog Park in the city of Brisbane. Multiple poisonings of dogs from, wait for it, Chris and viewers, marijuana left in the park.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
So not sure if someone just forgot their weed or whether it was deliberately calculated to poison. But marijuana is absolutely quite harmful. Apparently to dogs, can be fatal. The trips that they have, and there's vomiting, there's all sorts of things that occur. And so council's taken a fairly extreme step of installing CCTV cameras in an effort to reduce incidents like this.
Very interesting story, Tony. I've never heard of that happening. Marijuana and dogs. Let's hope they can get to the bottom of that with that use of technology.
Check your pockets before you walk into the dog park.
All right. I think we've reached the natural conclusion of this week's episode. Tony, thank you. You mentioned you'd been down at Moyne during the week. I saw that on LinkedIn. You were there with Brett Davis, who's the CEO of Moyne, and Brett's one of our latest local leaders guests on VLGA Connect.
Oh, that'll be interesting. Brett's always got some good things to say. Has a great background in planning in particular. But yeah, the team at Moyne were really good. Councillor Karen Foster, the mayor. But I'm loving those local leaders broadcasts you're doing. I saw the recent one you did with Joseph Haweel from the city of Hume.
Doesn't he speak well?
I've got to say, I was really struck by how well spoken he was, how well considered his commentary was. I think there's a real, obviously a current leader there, but I think that, we could see a real future leader in the state coming through local government, and that would be, I think, awesome for all of us, whatever our political positions are. We need people at other levels of government who understand local government. Joseph didn't say he was about to jump ship, folks.
No, I did ask. I did ask what was in his political future, but I agree. So well considered, constructed answers, really thoughtful, eloquent, worth a listen if you haven't listened or watched. We talk about the housing and planning stuff that's coming out of the state. We talk about his recent comments about LG Pro that led to the council voting to cancel its corporate membership, but he did say that probably won't be in place for too long, but they wanted to send a message and make a point, which they clearly did. And we talk about a whole heap of other things. It's well worth catching up on VLGA Connect local leaders.
Yeah, great. As I say, great programs, and even catch up on the back copies of them. That's what I do. I don't necessarily catch them in the week that they're recorded, but really love that latest one too.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. Yes, there's much to catch up on there. If you haven't seen them, check them out on YouTube or your podcast player under the VLGA Connect feed. All right, we'll leave it there. Tony, have a great long weekend, and I look forward to catching up with you next week. Hopefully we might have Julie Reid back from her UK travels next week as well to catch up with.
Thanks, viewers.
Thanks to Tony Raunic. That's Hunt and Hunt Lawyers as well. We want to thank our sponsors for VLGA Connect. That's your TGU for this week. We'll catch up with you again very soon. Bye for now.